Okay, guys, so now that we have gone over the three loops that you need to know, we're just going to do one final lesson, bringing it all together and summarizing these loops, and especially when to use them. Because one of the most important part about loops is using the best loop for the scenario that you're in. Otherwise, you're going to be creating inefficient code. All right, so let's start with talking about a while loop. Now, we're going to run this code, which uses a while loop to function, and we're going to talk about why we used a while loop. So you have $20 to spend. What would you like to buy? Okay, we have three options from the menu, and as long as we stay under $20, we're okay to keep purchasing. So I could choose to buy a chocolate bar. Okay, my current bill is $6.99. Gonna throw some Kazoozles on there, another chocolate bar. Okay, and then when I try to purchase the candy pack, I have exceeded $20, so I can't afford that. It's time to leave the store. So in this program, I repeated the loop one, two, three, four times. If I run it again, and all I purchase is the most expensive thing, the chocolate bar, you will see that I can only get through this loop one, two, three times before running out of money. And one last example, if all I buy is the cheapest options, one, two, three, four, five, six, 7 times I go through the loop before I have to leave. So for this program, we don't know when we're coding how many times we're going to be repeating the loop. That depends on the user input. That depends on if they spend money on more expensive or less expensive products. Now, if you don't know how many times a loop is going to be running, you should be using a while loop or a do while loop. When you do know exactly how many times it's going to run when you're coding it, you should be using a for loop. Now, I used a while loop for this, but you could just as easily use a do while loop. Okay, here's my introduction. I create all of my variables. I create my scanner. I explain that they're part of the shop, blah, blah, blah. And here's where the magic happens down here. I have a while loop that runs while the cost is less than 20. The cost starts at 0. Okay, I start out by jumping to the next line and telling the user what their current bill is at. Well, right now they haven't bought anything, so it's still at 0. And I ask them what they would like to purchase, taking the user input. All right, now if choice is equal to 1, then I'm going to increase the bill by $6.99, which, as I specified up here, option 1, Willy Wonka chocolate bar, is $6.99. If the choice is number 2, I'm going to increase the bill by $4.50. If the choice is number 3, I'm going to increase it by $3, which you could use an if, else, if statement for this, or you could actually create it as a switch, right, for the exact same thing. Now, I am going to come back up to the top, and I'm going to say, let's take a look at my cost again. All right, is my cost still less than $20? Which, if I've only bought one product, then yeah, my cost is definitely less than $20. And I'm going to update them with their current bill, and I'm going to ask them again, what would you like to purchase? And I keep repeating this over and over and over until their bill becomes more than $20, at which point I will say, whoa, 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 your last purchase is too much. You can't afford that. We're going to exit the while loop and say, you can't afford that. It's time to leave. So that's a good example of when you would use a do while, because you don't know how many times this loop is going to run. It could run 3 times, it could run 7 times, depending on what choices the user makes. Now, a do while loop, as I've already mentioned, is extremely similar to a while loop, except that the condition comes at the end of the loop instead of the beginning of the loop. The only implication that this has is that the loop will always enter and run at least once. And the order at which things occur will change, so make sure you're accounting for that within your code. Now, this program is very similar. Type yes to continue. Every time you type yes, it will increase a counter by 1 until you type in anything else, and the program will just close. Now, remember that this is what we call a sentinel. A sentinel is when the user chooses that a loop will end. by inputting a certain value, command, or whatever it may be. Now, do whiles are useful in many scenarios, but do whiles will always be used for a sentinel. Because if you use a while loop for a sentinel, you have to ask them the same question before you enter the loop as you do within the loop. If my condition was at the beginning of the loop, then I would have to tell them, type yes to continue before even looking at it, because otherwise I would have no input to compare with my condition, which again would be at the beginning of the loop. So we use a do while. That way we always ask them at least once, type yes to continue, and we will always have something to compare with our condition. So pretty straightforward. Type yes to continue. They type in a yes or something else. Either way, you print out count plus plus. So you increase count and you print it out, or you print it out and you increase count rather. And then we check what they inputted, and we either do it again or we don't do it again. Now, the final example, the final loop that you guys need to know is the for loop. And as I've already said this lesson, a for loop will be used when you know exactly how many times a loop will repeat when you're coding it. Now, the purpose of this program is to add the numbers between 1 and 100. So I'm going to use a for loop to access the numbers 1 to 100. I know each time I'm going to repeat this loop 100 times because I'm going to take 1, add it to sum. I'm going to take 2, add it to sum. Take 3, add it to sum. And I'm going to do that for all of the numbers 1 through 100. So I have a for loop which starts at 1, which increases by 1 every time, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and it keeps increasing until it is less than or equal to 100. So when I get to 101, that is when my loop is going to stop. I'm going to repeat this loop 100 times. Now, each time that I enter this loop, I'm going to take the current count, which could be any number between 1 and 100, and I am going to add it to sum. Okay, sum equals sum plus count, or sum plus equals count. Note that because I only have one line of code within this loop, I don't have to include those curly brackets, but still pay close attention to your indentation. It still needs to be indented forward. After I'm done this for loop, I'm simply going to print out the total sum. The sum of numbers between 1 and 100 is, and then the value that we got. Now, let's run that really quick. Okay, the sum of numbers between 1 and 100 is 5,050, which is correct. If you guys know the shortcut, it's just 100 times 101 divided by 2, which is also going to be 5,050. All right, and then I repeat this exact same program down here, but I do it with a while loop just to show you how it is more inefficient. With a while loop, I create a variable sum1, which will keep track of the sum, and I create a variable count1, which will increase 1, 2, 3, 4 all the way to 100, the exact same way that we did with the for loop. But with the while loop, I have to include my condition, and then down in the actual while loop, I have to increase count. All right, so I have to use an extra line of code when using a while loop in order to accomplish the exact same thing, making this more inefficient and honestly much more difficult to read than the for loop which we created up here, but they do the exact same thing. It's just you should be using a for loop because you know exactly how many times your loop is going to run. So please make sure you know the difference between the loops and when to use them. Your homework for today is just generic questions, and you will have to choose which loop is best for which scenario. So please make sure that you're completing it, and please make sure that you're practicing. Okay, again, please let me know through email if you have any questions that I can help with.